Hello, and thank you for selecting my video. I've published my video online for you and anybody that's interested in Dundee buses in the 1980s. I would like to share with you my small article about it. When I grew up during the 1980s in Dundee, Dundee had one major bus company that served Dundee. It was called Thankyou Buses. There were other smaller bus companies as well. One was called Strathday Buses, which focused mainly on the rural areas around Dundee. Thankyou Buses had various overall bus liveries during the 1980s. Dark blue, white and light blue was one of them. Dark blue, cream and yellow was the later livery used towards the end of the 1980s. Back in the 1920s, Dundee Corporation started using omnibuses. This is a technical term to describe a bus with an engine. This is in contrast with trams, which use electricity from overhead pantographs, and the term horse and cart. Automobile is the term used to describe a car with an engine. These terms were used in the early days when modes of transport had many various methods, unlike today when we take for granted vehicles have an engine. During the 1920s, Dundee Corporation painted their buses green until the 1970s when Tayside Regional Council ran the buses. They started painting their buses dark blue, white and light blue. The double-decker models that were popular during the corporation days were the backloader type, like the world-famous London Routemaster bus. They were made from various bus manufacturers like Daimler and AEC, just to name a few. Dundee had various single-deckers as well. In the 1960s, Dundee Corporation started buying Daimler Fleetliners. These buses were totally different in design to the earlier double-deckers. They had the passenger exit and entrance door at the front, near the driver, and it had its Gardner engine at the rear. This was the start of the modern era of design of bus, like today. It was possible to run a one-person crew on these buses, like today, although Dundee Corporation still ran them with a two-crew staff right up until the mid-1970s. In the mid-1970s, Tayside Regional Council done away with the bus conductor and left the driver to collect all the fares. Tayside Regional Council started buying Volvo Ailses in the 1970s as a major type of bus. There were also other models as well, like the Bristol VRT, for example. But the Volvo Ailse became their main double-decker model. The Volvo Ailse model was a two-door model, with passengers on at the front and off near the middle. The engine was at the front, like the backloaders, but didn't have an opening bonnet. Its engine was in line alongside the driver and covered with an engine pod. This makes the Ailse have a flush front appearance, just like the modern double-deckers today. The Volvo Ailse bus is the model I'm most familiar with, as I grew up with them during the 1980s. It's my favourite type of bus and I have lots of memories about them. I have a passion for them and I am involved in a group which restores some of the few remaining Ailses that are left. There are other bus restoration groups up and down the country that also restore Volvo Ailses, as well as other vintage bus models. There is bus museums that have annual open days for the public. One is Lathamond Bus Museum, not far from Dunfermline, and Volvo Ailses is a popular model that attend these opening days. The Lathamond bus opening days are usually held during August. This is a typical example of a backloader bus used in Dundee during the early days. In the 1960s, Dundee Corporation buses started buying rear-engined forward entrance buses. These were Daimler Fleetliners. In the mid-1970s, Tayside Regional Buses ran the buses using their dark blue, white and light blue livery. Towards the end of the 80s, Tayside painted their buses using a cream and yellow and a lighter blue for their livery. Tayside buses had a fleet of approximately 140 double-decker buses during the 1980s. The model mainly used by Tayside was the Volvo Ailsa double-decker bus. These buses came in 3 generations, known as the Mark I, the Mark II and the Mark III. In another video I will explain in more detail about the Volvo Ailsa bus and about its design, etc. The Volvo Ailsa model came in 3 marks. The bus shown here is a Mark I. It has blue seats inside. Shown here is a Mark II Ailsa. Visually the Mark II has a slightly higher windscreen. Like the Mark I, it had blue seats as well. The Mark III Ailsas shown here had a totally different bodywork compared to the Mark Is and Mark II. They had orange fabric seats inside. In another video I will go into greater depth explaining about the Volvo Ailsa with its variations and different bodyworks, etc. This is a video I taken at Lathamond Bus Museum of an ex-Tayside Mark 1A Volvo Ailsa. It was fleet numbered 263 and it still survives today under preservation. Being an Ailsa, it has the engine at the front, hence the big grille visible. I took this video inside a very unique Mark II Volvo Ailsa. This is the only Mark II Ailsa that Tayside had with the Mark III engine in it. It did, however, retain its original Mark II rear axle, thus making it sound very unique. This bus is fleet number 276 and it still survives today under preservation. In the 1980s, Tayside buses ran about 30 bus routes to serve most of Dundee. An adult fare was less than £1 and a child fare was just pennies, a long way from today's prices. Like everything else, prices go up with inflation. Tayside buses had one main depot in the 1980s and it was located on East Dock Street. Although Tayside did have smaller depots, these were closing down, leaving its main Dock Street depot, which is used today. At the end of the 1980s and into the 1990s, Tayside started converting their fleet of buses from 2 doors to 1 door. They started buying a different type of bus known as the Volvo B10M City bus. The double-decker model was a replacement for the older Volvo Ailsas. Shown here are the Tayside Volvo B10M City buses. This is what replaced the earlier Volvo Ailsas. They were more advanced, they had bigger engines and air sac suspension fitted. These were also the first buses to come to Tayside with the bus stopping signs when you pressed the bell. They also had bright orange grab rails and they were built with the single door. They had great heating as well. These were used mainly on the Douglas and Charleston routes. The bodywork used was Alexander RV type, which was used similarly on the earlier Volvo Ailsas. This is what the Alexander RV type bodywork looked like on the Volvo Ailsa. These are my favourites of all buses anywhere, and I have grown up with these and I have many memories and stories about them, but that's for another video though. These had dark brown seats in them, just like the Mark Is and Mark IIs, but they were blue instead. They were built by the same manufacturer as the Mark Is and the Mark IIs. Tayside only bought 15 of those, just like the Volvo B10M City bus, which made it rare to see a brown seat bus. The Mark I and Mark II and these had solid suspension. The Mark III Ailsas, however, had an air sac suspension, like that used on the B10M City bus. The Tayside Mark I and Mark II Volvo Ailsas had blue seats, and the Mark IIIs had orange fabric maquette seats. In 1991, Tayside Bus Company became employee-owned. They started buying small batches of various models of single-deckers. This was the first time since the late 1960s that single-deckers were bought. Seen here is the very first low-floor single-decker bus Tayside employee-owned bought back in 1993. It is a Scania model and it is registered L3 low for low-floor bus. Tayside employee-owned continued buying small batches of single-deckers throughout the 1990s. These single-deckers were replacing double-deckers, and sometimes double-deckers were being withdrawn from service and replaced with nothing, shrinking the Tayside employee-owned fleet of buses even further. Tayside employee-owned buses continued until January 1997, when it was bought over by the National Express Group. It was then renamed Travel Dundee. Travel Dundee started phasing out double-decker buses and started replacing them with low-floor single-deckers. The model selected for the single-deckers was called the Volvo B10L and B10 BLEs. These were to become the main single-decker models. Travel Dundee in 1997, shortly after it was formed by National Express, had their single-deckers buses in a red and blue white livery. A few years later, Dundee started buying double-decker buses, but still bought single-deckers as well. The bus company has had a few name changes and revisions to its livery, but it was always owned by National Express. Gradually their fleet of buses are made up of more double-deckers with their latest Alexander Dennis and Viral 400s, also known as the Emeralds. These have a slightly lighter green and are route branded for the Broughty Ferry routes and the 20 and 22 route. Today, the main bus depot is still located on East Dock Street, but it has shrunk in size, making way for the Gallagher retail park next to it. Explore Dundee has recently started painting their buses green, like what Dundee Corporation did in the 1960s. They have even painted a double-decker in the Dundee Transport Museum livery. I've been driving buses for Explore Dundee since August 2008. And I have become fond of the Volvo B7TL Gemini double-deckers. These are the oldest buses currently in their fleet, and they sound the most powerfulest. They drive and handle quite well for the bus. I personally prefer these buses over the newer buses. It makes my shift going a lot quicker. I hope you've enjoyed my short video, and if you wish, you could comment, like or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.